Today, we become legends.
So I've been playing a ton of Tsukuyomi since its launch, and he's one of the most fun releases we've had in a long time. There's a lot you can do with his kit and extra bits of damage or utility you can squeeze out of his abilities, so let's jump into this guide. As with all of my god guides, I'm going to cover everything there is to know about Tsukuyomi, and that includes the basics. So I'll split up the guide into different subsections that you can skip around to as you need using the timestamps down below or on the timeline bar of the video. First up, the basic playstyle of Tsukuyomi, what he's all about and why you may want to play him. Then all of his abilities in depth, what they do and the best ways to use them. After that, items and builds, where I'll discuss how I build Tsukuyomi to make the most effective use of his kit. And finally, tips and tricks, where I'll give some of my additional small things that you can do on Tsukuyomi to up your game. And once again, if you want to skip any of this stuff like the basics, you can use the timestamps on screen or on the timeline bar of the video. But let's jump into this with Tsukuyomi's basic playstyle. So Tsukuyomi in Smite plays like a ranged assassin. He has great burst damage from a long range, while also having the ability to play in melee range and dive the backline in traditional assassin fashion. However, he does lack a little in mobility and CC to compensate for this fact that he has great burst damage and great range. If your flavour of assassin is one that can poke from the sidelines of the fight to get someone low before diving in to finish them off, Tsukuyomi might just be for you. Alright, so now you've decided if you want to play him, let's dive into Tsuku's abilities in depth and the best ways to use them. So starting with his passive, Tsukuyomi uses two weapons, Shingetsu and Mangetsu, which for ease of use I'll call purple and white from now on. Once you hit an enemy with purple, it becomes empowered, granting a 50% cleave and mana restoration on subsequent hits with the purple. And once you hit an enemy with white, it becomes empowered, granting bonus damage and health restoration on subsequent hits of the white. You can track if your weapons are in this empowered state using your passive meter. So this passive is pretty simple and not really something you have to pay attention to. It gives some minor sustain as you clear jungle camps and minion waves, and also helps you clear with the cleave on the purple weapon, but overall this passive is just a nice bonus and not something you really have to keep track of in game. Tsuku's first ability, Dark Moon Shuriken, is a pretty simple line damage ability that passes through minions and stops at the first god hit, damaging every enemy. If you come into melee range of the god you hit with this, you retrieve your Shuriken and get a 4-second cooldown refund on the ability. After casting this ability, regardless of if you hit anything with it, your next basic attack becomes ranged and will steal 25% movement speed from the target you hit with it. This functions like a normal ranged basic attack, aka it will not go through walls, will stop at the first target hit and do your basic attack power and damage, and it will also activate basic attack item effects like kin size, and it can crit. So this ability is a majority of Tsukuyomi's ranged poke. The ability itself has good range, solid damage, and goes through minions so you can poke if you're in a lane roll while also clearing the wave. And then you also get that ranged auto attack that you can use for follow up and more damage afterwards, and also get that ranged auto attack that you can use for follow up and more damage afterwards. This ability is also really good for chasing, since the 25% movement speed steal effectively creates a 50% speed difference between you and your target, allowing you to catch up to them and keep in range for your other abilities and basic attack. Moving on, we have Tsukuyomi's best ability as of right now, Kusarigama. This is a 3-part ability where Tsuku swings his weapon to the left, then to the right, and then in front of him, doing damage in an area around him for the first 2 hits, and in front of him for the final hit. Tsukuyomi also gains 33% movement speed while channeling, and is knock-up immune for the duration. The first 2 hits disarm enemies, while the final hit stuns enemies and does significantly more damage, so you want to be hitting this final swing at all costs, even if you miss the first 2 swings. This ability itself doesn't have that much range, so you're going to have to be pretty close in to use this, but with your one's movement speed steal, the speed on the ability itself, blink, plus other parts of his kit that we'll cover shortly, it's relatively easy to get into the fight and use this ability effectively. It's your only form of hard CC, so make sure you're using it wisely. This ability is also the ability I level first for jungle camp clear in the jungle and minion wave clear in a laning role like solo or mid. Tsuku's third ability is Silver Moon Caltrops. Tsukuyomi casts a trap of Caltrops in a crescent shape in front of him, creating a field of spikes that slows and damages any enemy that walks through them. And much like his one, when you cast this ability, your next basic attack will become ranged, but instead of movement speed stealing, the ranged basic from the 3 does additional true damage on hit, and once again, this functions like a standard basic attack. So it will proc item effects and can crit. This ability is mostly used for gap closing and zone control. You can place the Caltrops behind enemies that are running from you in order to block them in, since they either run through and take tons of damage and get slowed, or they have to move around the Caltrops, which gives you time to finish them off. This can also be used to effectively cut off corridors in the jungle or around objectives to prevent enemies moving freely, and is also somewhat useful for clearing waves and camps in a pinch, though usually your 1 and 2 will do just fine for clearing. And one thing to note with this ability is that its range is shorter than the ranged basic attack, so even if you're not in range to connect the caltrops themselves, you may still be in range to hit the ranged basic attack afterwards to secure a low health kill. And finally, the ability you've all been waiting for, Tsukuyomi's ultimate, Piercing Moonlight, is a two-part ability. Firstly, you channel 4 beams of moonlight and fire them up to 90 units in front of you, one after the other. These beams do damage and mark enemies. After the 4th beam is fired, you'll perform a lightning fast dash attack between all enemies that you marked with the beams in the order they were marked. So if you hit Scylla with the 1st beam, Ula with the 2nd, then Scylla again with the 3rd, then Geb with the 4th, you'll dash through Scylla, then Ula, then back to Scylla, then end at Geb. You're CC immune for the entire channel of this ability, and as of the making of this guide, you also have 50% damage mitigation while firing the beams, so you're very hard to kill when using this. Though I imagine at some point that mitigation is going to get heavily nerfed or straight up removed. This ability does insane damage if you can hit all 4 beams, and is only really vulnerable to Aegis in a limited way since it's a 2-part ability. However, it's worth a note that if the enemy does use Aegis on the beams, it does no damage to the enemy and you won't mark them, therefore you won't dash to them. You have to do damage with the beams in order to be able to dash to people. Also, if an enemy uses beads or any other CC immunity after you hit them with the beam, they will remove the mark and you once again won't dash to them. You'd have to hit them again when they're not CC immune to remark them to be able to dash. So this ability is very versatile and is a huge part of why Tsukuyomi is so strong right now. This can be used as a long-range engage or chase tool, utilizing the 90 unit range to ping enemies from far away or even over walls, dash in and secure the kill. It can be used for the mitigations and CC immunity to buy time or avoid big damage and CC abilities in the midst of a fight. It can be simply used for raw damage, just trying to hit as many people as possible with the beams to get the maximum damage out of this, which trust me, max damage from this ability is a lot of damage. Hell, you can even try and steal objectives with this since it goes through walls and hits from so far away. The possibilities with this are just endless. There's a lot you can do with this ability, and as you play Tsukuyomi more, you'll realise how versatile this is and how it's useful in a different way in almost every situation. Hitting multiple enemies with each beam means more overall damage, so if you're just ulting for big damage in the middle of a fight, that's your best bet. But if you want to quickly burst down one target, like their mage in the backline for example, using all 4 beams on one enemy means the 4 dashes at the end will be insanely fast because you're not travelling any distance, you're just dashing back and forth on the same enemy and you'll burst them down very quickly before they can get effective peel from their team, so keep that in mind. Alright, so with all of Tsukuyomi's abilities and some intricacies with them covered, let's move on to his itemization choices and a couple build examples for him to get you started. So Tsukuyomi, in my opinion, is best built like a traditional burst assassin, prioritizing high power, penetration and cooldown reduction to amp up his damage and make sure he always has abilities to cast. However, he does make special use of a couple of items that are better on him than most other ability assassins, and I also have an interesting crit build that I want to showcase at the end of this section too. So if you're into weird off-meta builds that actually work quite well, stick around for that one. But first, we'll cover what I think is the optimal build path for him, that of the ability-based assassin. Tsukuyomi, in my opinion, plays 3 roles effectively right now, however he pretty much builds the same or very similar in all 3, so I'll focus on his jungle viability, which is by far his best role, and then touch on additional items and strategies for solo and mid near the end. Alright, so for starting builds in jungle, you of course need Assassin's Blessing. Then I would strongly recommend tier 1 mace, 1 HP potion, and Hand of the Gods. This start gives you the early clear from Hog and allows you to build into one of the mace penetration items early on for the best power curve. But before you finish that mace, you want to get boots for the mobility and the cheap stats. I've had success with both Warrior Tabby and Talaria boots on him, but I lean more towards Warrior Tabby because of the extra power. His power scalings are crazy and he makes great use out of the extra 30 that Warrior Tabby gives. However, if you're the type of player that favours more movement speed from Talaria very heavily, you can definitely make that work too. After your boots of choice, you want to go back and finish that tier 1 mace into either the Crusher or Brawler's Beatstick, depending on if they have significant healing. Brawlers if they do, Crusher if they don't. From there, I like to rush straight into Transcendence on Tsukuyomi. Crusher/Brawlers gives you 15 pen, which is easily good enough early on, and you can back up that penetration with some huge raw power from Transcendence. This is one of those 2 items that Tsuku uses better than most ability-based assassins, simply because his scalings are crazy right now. The 1 is 90%, the 2 is 180%, the 3 is varying depending on how much they walk through the caltrops, but it's usually around 100%, and the ult is 300%. So the insane raw power value of Transcendence is really nice for him, plus having infinite mana is cool too. After these 3 items, you can start to branch out into what you prefer or what you need in the current match. Here are some items I like to build for my final slots. Hydra's Lament is pretty much an essential item on Tsukuyomi in my opinion. This is the other item that he makes far better use of than most ability assassins, and that's because the passive of the item works on his ranged basic attacks. And since you have to cast an ability in order to get them in the first place, you're always activating Hydras on these, which is very reliable from range, which is super good. I usually grab this either straight after Transcendence in 4th slot or after that in 5th slot. Arendite is really nice for Suku since it gives 70 power for his high scalings, 10% CDR which is always nice, and the passive is great for chasing down kills after your ult finishes. Soul Eater isn't an essential item for jungle or mid, but if you like the way it feels and enjoy having sustain on your assassins, you can definitely pick this up. If you're playing Suku in solo lane however, this is essential and should be built early on in your build for the sustain in the laning phase. Heartseeker is just a broken item and should always be in your build somewhere no matter the role. However, it is more of an expensive luxury item, so I recommend it in either 5th or 6th slot, usually not before then. Bloodforge is great if you're getting consistent kills in fights, but if you're behind and or can't secure kills consistently, this isn't the best item. But if you're on the offense and getting those kills, it's insanely good. Titan's Bane is a decent item if tanks are giving you trouble specifically, but honestly I don't pick this up very much since you're looking to target squishies in fights, not tanks. And finally, if you need some defense in your build because you're getting blown up and or you're playing him in solo, I like Void Shield and Mantle of Discord as my go-to defensive options. Usually I don't feel the need to go defense on Suku from jungle or mid, but in solo you definitely want to pick up both of these somewhere in your build to give you that bruiser playstyle and allow you to survive a little longer playing frontline. Alright, so that's all my item choices for Tsukuyomi. Let's finish this up with a couple of build examples to get you started. For jungle, start with Assassin's Blessing, tier 1 mace, 1 HP potion and Hand of the Gods, grab Warrior Tabby, finish your mace into the Crusher or Brawlers if necessary, then get Transcendence, Hydra's Lament, Arendite, replace your Blessing with Heartseeker, and if the game goes long enough, sell your boots for Bloodforge and get the Elixir of Speed. Your relics for jungle should be Blink and Beads in the order you prefer, though I recommend Blink first as Tsukuyomi because you can have trouble getting into fights. This build comes with the sweet spot of 30% CDR, so you can reach the cap of 40% once you buy your power potion. It comes with tons of power, enough penetration to get by with a combination of some flat and some percent, plus extra damage from passives like Arendite, Hydras and Heartseeker to allow you to nuke those squishies in fights. If you're playing Tsukuyomi mid, you can use this build as well. Just replace Assassin's Blessing with Mage's Blessing and drop the Hand of the Gods for some extra potions. For solo lane, it's a little bit different though. Start with Warrior's Blessing, Health Chalice and 4 multi-potions, grab Warrior Tabby, Soul Eater, Void Shield, Arendite, Heartseeker, replace your Blessing with Mantle of Discord, and if the game goes long enough, you can sell your boots for Bloodforge. This build still offers good damage and that critical 30% CDR, but it also has some defense and sustain through Soul Eater that's vital for the solo lane laning phase. So that's it for his meta builds, but I also want to quickly showcase a crit build for Tsukuyomi that is a lot of fun and you should definitely try, but it's not as good as standard ability power builds in my opinion. The start is the same, Crusher / Brawlers, Warrior Tabby, Transcendence, but then you go into Malice, Deathbringer and Hydra's Lament to finish off the build, selling your boots for Bloodforge if you get the chance. Once again, we still have that 30% cooldown that becomes 40% with the power potion, but we also have Malice passive reducing all cooldowns except your ult by 3 seconds when you crit, and the way you play this style of build is using your 1 and 3 repeatedly from range to poke enemies and using the crit ranged autos to burst people down and reset your cooldowns through Malice passive to continue dishing them out. This way you can poke from range extremely effectively before you fully commit and dive in with your ult and 2. It's just an interesting build style that I've had a lot of success with and that you should definitely try out if you're looking for something interesting on Tsukuyomi. But moving on from item builds, let's finish up this guide with a few tips and tricks to up your game on Tsukuyomi. So first up, if you find yourself clearing camps with caltrops, make sure you're moving around and dragging the monsters through them for extra damage. You can easily hit the jungle chalices on the way past using your ranged autos, so try and finish off a camp using either your 1 or your 3 so you have a ranged auto ready to ping the chalice on the way past. It's a lot faster than walking up to it and using a melee basic attack. The 2 hits on the left and then the right, so make sure you're maneuvering properly to get both hits. Alternatively, you can just hit the enemy with the front of the hitbox since both sides actually hit in front of you as well, so you can just easily hit all 3 hits using that. If you're out of range to hit the 2, don't worry. Most of the damage from this ability comes from the final swing, so you can actually just use the extra movement speed from the initial 2 swings to close the gap on your enemies, and then slam them with the stun on the final hit, allowing you or your team to follow up. The ranged auto attack on the 1 doesn't steal movement speed, it actually just lowers enemy movement speed by 25% and increases yours by 25% of your own current movement speed. So you gain the same speed regardless of which target you hit with this. Which can be useful if you're chasing someone but are out of range. You can auto attack a minion or jungle camp on the way past to get that 25% speed boost and catch up to your target. Make sure that if you're taking an objective, you're using the 3 to zone enemies. They will either have to wait for them to end, walk around them or jump over them, or walk through them, which are all bad options for the enemy, so cutting off a jungle pathway with these just eases up the pressure on taking objectives. And finally, when using the ultimate, be cognizant of who you hit with the final beam. If you want to dive into the backline and go for a kill, make sure the final beam hits their mage or hunter. Even if your other beams hit different targets, it's the final one that matters for where you land at the end of it. And likewise, if you decide midway through ulting that it's a really bad idea to dive in on the backline right now, you can tag an enemy on the front line with your final beam, land in their front line instead of their backline, and allow you to easily get out more safely. But that's it for my Tsukuyomi guide. There's a ton of stuff you can do with this guy, and I think he's really interesting and fun. Once he gets some nerfs, I think he can be one of the most fun gods we've seen in a long time, but abuse him while you can, and hopefully this guide will help you in doing that. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.